Is it better?
It is better, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I have from time to time with my microphone that go down. I don't know. So I will try to keep it not so low.
Okay, so should we have him do the presentation now, you guys, and then do reports? Does that make sense?
I think that makes perfect sense.
Okay. Well, Christian, if you are willing, I think you were gonna do a presentation. Probably we should just do that now while we have the people here in plenary. If that is okay for you.
Yes, it's okay. Please let me know if there's some problem.
Yeah. Okay.
And Christian, please, after your presentation, could you please send it to us also after your presentation?
You could send him the link to the recording of yesterday, because he might be interested in that.
Okay.
Okay. Christian, you are fading in and out a lot.
Sorry?
Okay, now you're very loud. You had again gone quiet on us. Let's see why don't you go ahead and try to do the presentation, and we'll send you a chat if we have any difficulty, okay?
Yes, I think I will have to keep. I have to keep my mouse on the microphone. I don't know why it always move down. So if you're okay, I will start the presentation and keep the mouse on the microphone to keep it okay.
Okay, very good.
And we switch off the signal mics for now.
Do you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I will try to expand. It's other. So I will keep it this. Is it okay? So as I explained, we use NetCDF file only for managing output of semantic pipelines that we developed within the context of studying biodiversity and ecosystem within the ANAE research infrastructure, that to say infrastructures devoted to experimentation on continental ecosystem. So very briefly, a few words introducing what is the NetCDF format or the NetCDF context. So it's mostly a multi-dimensional array of data as figure right hand side for three-dimensional data, for example, for latitude, longitude, and time around these two coordinates, or left hand side for four-dimensional data and so on. So it always a complete array of data. This is also, one very important point, a self-descriptive file structure, including an header with information about the dimension of the matrix, the variables that are managed within the matrix, and attributes describing the variables for their unit and so on. So you have left-hand side capture of what kind of NetCDF file you can produce with information about the dimension. So you have here three dimension, latitude, longitude, and time. Four variables that are declared in the second part of the header. Global attributes that concern the whole files, not only specific variables. And then you have data concerning firstly, the dimension, and second, the value of the variable. Okay, I'll go on. It's also another important point. It's also a machine-independent structure And this is why we can use it whatever the operating system you are working with. And more globally, NetCDF is usually defined as a data abstraction for array-oriented data access and the software library that make it possible to access, to generate, to read this array-oriented data format. So, other important point about NetCDF file is the fact that it consists or corresponds to lightweight file due to the structure, the storage structure, depending on the fact that it is the original NetCDF format or NetCDF4, so the new version. Data are binary and compressed, so it explains why it's rather lightweight files. Okay, few words now about the context we are working on for producing the data with the NetCDF format. It's study about biodiversity, so I won't say anything about the general context. As you know, it's global challenges about ecosystem and so on. For addressing the main challenges, the research infrastructure provide for research communities experimentation tools, facilities for studying either in control condition or in natural condition in situ, as well in between the ecosystem. It also provides analytic platforms or mobile instruments, as well as information system for data management, also data analysis. So one of the big issue with this kind of information collected from the different experimental platform, is how to deal with the heterogeneity of the information provided in order to be able to discover, but not only discover, but to have access to the resources and to exploit this information, as I explained, coming from distributed platforms and managed in very different, very heterogeneous way. So the option we selected was to develop Semantic for interoperability. So I will be very short. So Semantic consists in identifying the different elements of the ecosystem we are studying, for example, air, tree, and so on, and the relation this component have, and to model these elements using a control vocabulary, an ontology. Here is an example of modeling the observation about the height of the tree using an ontology that has been created for study of ecosystem, and that is called oboe. So doing this, we model all the experimental system, not only the variables, but also the experimental context, using the basic elements of the oboe model, who consist in identifying the observation realized for a specific entity, for example, for a tree. And for this observation, we have measurements about one or several characteristics, such as height, age, and so on. And for each of these measurements, we have, of course, value, precision, protocol, and so on, and unit. So we developed this approach with the objective of having an integrated workflow from the annotation of the generally the relational database that are used to manage the data collected from the platform. Donc, from the relational database to the production of metadata records or data set, that's to say, in this case, with the NetCDF format, we develop an integrated pipeline that make it possible to lift the data from relational database to graph data, and then to exploit the information to automatically produce this information and to push the files in data repository, for example, Dataverse. So this is an illustration how it's done for data from lake experimentation, mostly about phytoplankton here. So we model the experimental system on the right-hand side of the slide with information about the variables, the lower part of the graph, and also about the experimental system from the plot to the experimental network, using always the model proposed by the Obo ontology. And doing that, we produce dataset, NetCDF format that are published on Dataverse. So this is an example of that dataset about plankton, temperature of the water, and orthophosphorus concentration in one lake, the Lake Geneva. So let's go back to the NetCDF format for the same example of data. If you have a look at the content of the NetCDF, you will find the element I already described. That's to say, are provided first description of the dimension. We have dimension with a number of dates where we have observation about the phytoplankton, and also another dimension about the number of the name of the species. Here is the number of the species that have been identified when studying phytoplankton. The variables.
Can you ask questions during the presentation or not?
Sorry?
Can you ask questions during the presentation?
Yes, you can do.
I'm just wondering why there is a third dimension.
You are wondering?
Why there is a third dimension?
A third? No, there's yes. The first dimension 2 is the depth relative to, it's here. The depth relative to surface where were collected the water sample. And there's 2 depths. Okay?
Okay.
And the second was about the number of dates.
Mm-hmm.
And the third was about the number of species. Sorry, I didn't explain the first one. Yeah, you're right. And this dimension were described using the semantic annotation we perform at the beginning of the process, at the beginning of the workflow. So that's why this information is provided through URI, such as this one, which is the URI corresponding to the lower depth relative to surface for the first dimension, and so on for the other 2 other dimensions, that's to say the date and taxon name. Okay, and the second part of the header is a description of the variables that are studied. So the variable studied is the volume per volume of the phytoplankton. And we have all the information provided by the annotation process about the fact that the entity that is observed is the phytoplankton. The standard, the unit for this measurement is micrometer cube per millimeter, and so on. So the name of the network, the name of the plot, the name, etc. All elements that you already saw in the graph that I explained 2 minutes ago. So for generating this NetCDF dataset, we transform initially data that were generated as RDF triples in a graph database. We extract this information mostly based on the as context property pattern provided by the Obo model. And this as context corresponds more or less directly to the dimension of the matrix that will be generated for the NetCDF file. So first step is the generation of a JSON file from the triples, and then we developed a converter from the JSON to the NetCDF file that call a library, a Java library for NetCDF dataset generation. And the as context dimension is at this step convert to the as context, property is convert to the dimension of the NetCDF array. So more generally, there are a set of library making it possible to read, but also to generate NetCDF dataset for different languages, programming languages, as well as for different statistical environments or GIS environments. So I will not explain more about that. You can find this information in the web easily. Now I will end my presentation with focusing on some specific features of the NetCDF files, NetCDF array. So you can get, of course, this information on the web at the Unidata site that produce the NetCDF and the NetCDF data format, as well as the libraries that make it possible to create and access. So first point is that this NetCDF array are multidimensional structure that contains data with the same data type. All data in variable are of the same type, of course. The header contains, I already described, the dimension of the matrix, description of the variables through notably the attributes that can be produced to explain how are measured these variables and what is experiment context in our case. The data consists in possibly two parts, a fixed size part with the data corresponding to dimensions that are strictly defined, that's to say limited dimension, and possibly at the end of the data part, another section that is called the record data part that correspond to data where there's unlimited dimension for this variable. In the NetCDF4 data model, there are additional features that make it to structure a little bit more complicated or elaborated way the data. We don't use it because we only have a simple multidimensional matrix, but we can create groups, define specific types of data, not only simple types such as integer, float, or string. And we can also provide the multiple unlimited dimension and not only one unique unlimited dimension, as in the case of the simple NetCDF format. And data are not only data in this case are stored in a chunk storage structure that make it more efficient to retrieve this information. So here is a screenshot of a description of the two data models. So well, you can maybe see the additional elements provided by the NetCDF4 right-hand side, with the addition of groups structuring the data set, and the possibility to define, to have a user-defined type, and not only classical primitive type of data. For more information, you can have a look not only at general information documentation about NetCDF, but more specifically on documentation related to Java, because to our knowledge, there are more detailed information in this part of this documentation as compared to the general documentation. So here's the link. Few words about the communities that use NetCDF format. It's not so used in my community, that's to say in ecology or biodiversity, because in most cases we don't have data corresponding to a strict multidimensional array. It's mostly more heterogeneous and not easily fitted in such regular matrices, except if you accept to have a lot of null data in your structure. But this format of files, this NetCDF array structure, are mostly used in climate community and also in the marine community, where most of the data are really managed using this format. So selection of this format has been based on a set of advantages that have been defined by this community, and you can also easily, for example, for the climate community, why NetCDF has been selected. The last point about this presentation is about the fact that in addition to the NetCDF format that I briefly explained, there has also been produced a set of guide in order to make more homogeneous, that's to say more interoperable, the information that is managed in this array structure. They are called conventions, and within these conventions, so here we have maybe 15 different conventions for different community. Within each convention, you have a recommendation about the way of properly declare the dimensions, the variable, and so on, to make data set more interoperable. And among this convention, the first one for climate and forecast is probably the most used. So I will stop this very brief presentation. So as you understood, I'm not a specialist of NetCDF, but a simple user. And we selected this format because first it's really standardized, and it also include in the header part the description of the content, the description of the dimension and the data, and it was a real added value for our work, for the management of the data generated by the annotation using semantic vocabularies of information coming from experimentation on ecosystem. So thank you.
Thank you, Christian. We're just getting the microphones turned back on here. Are they? No? Okay, very good. Thanks for that. Do people have questions? Anybody? Raise hands if you're virtual. Can someone see the participants? Edouard, why don't you raise your hand? Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that all the arrays of data must be complete. So I'm not sure I get that. If it's not, you have to put null everywhere. And is that a problem for size constraint or for the processing?
The matrix has not to be full with real value. It can be full with null value, as you say. So the problem is that you generate a very, even virtually, you generate a very huge matrix for very few data. And when looking at the data, especially if you don't convert this initial way of managing data, if you don't convert this way to a more classical way, such as tabular one, it's not so user friendly, or easy way to know what and where is the real information, because most of the matrix will be full with null value. So we do that. So we have in some cases a matrix with low information and a lot of null value, but it's not. I can find the word in English. Agréable in French.
Just nice.
Yeah,
Very
for
understandable.
people using the data set.
Larry, you have a question?
Yes, in one of your diagrams, you showed a relationship between variables and dimensions, where a variable is an aggregation of dimensions. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, there maybe there's some confusion about the naming of variables, because variables in NetCDF vocabulary is also descriptions of the dimension. So it's not the observed variables. It can be also the description of the dimension. So but there's really two parts of information in the header. So dimensions that correspond clearly to the factors that are studied or that structure the information, and the called variables that are the observation realized.
Interesting.
So Larry, your hand is still up, but I think you asked your question already, correct? There he goes. Edward, you have another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, because just quickly, what you say, you choose the format NetCDF, if I don't mistake. You choose it, but what were the other options you considered when you choose it?
We plan to, in addition to the NetCDF format, because we'll keep it when this format is well adapted for well structured, I would say, multidimensional data. In addition to this format, we plan to have something close to tabular data, but we're looking for format with associated management of the metadata describing the tables or the CSV files, CSV equivalent files. So we don't produce presently this other form of data set, and we are looking for what is already available, or we are very interested in what is discussed presently the international community for providing a format of data with metadata records within the data set, but with a structure of data that are not an array, a multidimensional array, but more a table, a kind of table.
Okay, thanks.
May I ask you what would be the main news or the main feature of interest for you about this format, and how do you plan to promote it?
I can try to answer that, Christian. What this workshop is looking at a standard model called DDI-CDI, cross-domain integration, and the idea of it is a little non-obvious, which is that when you're using data across domain boundaries, very often you have domain models, and I think NetCDF is an example of that for us. where you want to combine that data with data from completely different areas, like population data. So you have environmental data and you might have survey data. Very often you're dealing with different standards, even if they're both describing the same basic structures of data. And you want to combine them for use within some domain or cross-domain research in a set of tools. The idea of the standard that we're working on is to be able to describe data formats for interchange between domains. So as an example, we have a multidimensional model that we would use to describe any kind of multidimensional matrix, but it's very, very generic. And so we were speaking with Simon Cox, who's at, what is Simon's institution? CSIRO, do you know CSIRO in Australia?
Yeah.
And he had mentioned NetCDF to us as a very common format in certain areas, and I think you sort of explained the domains where it's used very intensively. And he said, look, there's a huge amount of data, high value, things like geographic data that are used in all kinds of GIS systems. And if you want to be able to interchange data between domains, that's going to be a very important part of the picture. I think we wanted to speak with you to make sure that, and what we'll be doing in this workshop, is looking at the sort of examples you presented and trying to figure out whether we can describe those structures with the model that we're using to do that. After seeing your presentation, I'm fairly confident we can, but that will take some exploration, I think. But the basic idea is it would be good if we could having identified data that's managed in the NetCDF format, but that we want to integrate with data coming from other sources. We can put that into a model that allows it to be integrated structurally and ideally semantically, probably with the assistance of other tools that deal more with ontologies and those kinds of things. And to produce an integrated data set in as programmatic a fashion as possible. Because if you have metadata about the structures and the semantics, you can leverage that by combining those things. That's sort of what we're focused on. I don't know if that's a good answer to your question, but that's sort of why we're interested in NetCDF. Larry, you have your hand up. Larry?
Yeah, just so I understand, a typical kind of data set might be an atmospheric data set where you have a three-dimensional grid of cells, and then within each cell you have a set of measurements, temperature, humidity, and so on. Is that correct?
Yes, completely, yes.
Okay, thanks.
So, anyone else? So, Christian, are you, just a question, would you be available if we can get a copy of your presentation? That would be great. I think there was a lot of good material in there that you went through very quickly, but that we might want to look at in a little more detail. Would you be available if we start looking at this and come up with questions for us to answer? Would that be possible at some point during the course of this week?
Yes. When exactly?
I have no idea. That would depend on your availability and other schedules. We have one of your colleagues, perhaps, Barbara Magana. Do you know Barbara?
Yeah.
Because she has worked with us a bit around the iAdopt work that she's done. You're probably familiar with.
Yeah.
So we have some access to her. I think she might understand some of this, but I think you specifically because of this presentation, I think we might just come up with questions. Could we just contact you, email or whatever, and
Yes, please do. I will have a look at my email box and try to make me free for new interaction.
okay.
So I'm here just to.
Oh,
say.
Barbara, you're here.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, Christian.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine.
So I've been talking about you behind your back, Barbara, except maybe it wasn't behind your back. That's terrible.
So I haven't heard everything, so yeah.
Okay, because Christian has gone through his presentation and we'll get a copy of that. We were just asking, after a little bit of discussion, if he might be available. I think we need to take what he presented and look at it a little bit, and maybe come back with questions. And I don't know, Barbara, do you know the NetCDF stuff also? Or is this something that...
Yes, but I'm happy to get through this presentation again, and probably also the recordings. And I have an idea what Christian has presented, but let me look into it and then see. I think there are bridges that it's really interesting, but another way to represent this, and I think there is a way also to represent this if I adopt so the header, the information, semantic information of the stuff that is observed and saved in this format. So.
Okay. So, should we bring this to a close? Are we done? Any further questions for Christian? No?
So I'm waiting for your email. Okay.
And Hilda, were you able to get the slides from Christian?
We have, there are a kind of, this, well, I'll check my email, I don't know. I'll send the recordings, but they haven't been downloaded yet, and there were kind of 5 recordings. So maybe before we publish them, we need to go through a little.
So,
Okay.
so Christian,
but we'll send it as soon as
we will have a recording of this session. We're reliant on the people who are operating the facility to provide the videos and so on, and that takes some time. We'll let you know when that's available. And in the meantime, we do have Christian's slides, or we'll get them.
We'll get them, but just now I'll send in the chat here. I will send a link to the presentations we had yesterday.
Okay.
So you can see them.
So Christian, we're uploading things onto our Confluence site, just a sort of collaborative site, as we work through the week. That's where we'll be putting up this recording, if that's good with you, of your presentation and of your slides. And Hilda's going to put the link. You're going to put that in the chat, Hilda?
Yes.
Okay.
It is now.
So that's the page if you want to take a look at that, with all the stuff from this week. And yeah, we will get back to you as we have a chance to work on this. So thank you very much, Christian. That was quite interesting. And I don't imagine that this will be particularly simple for us, but I'd like to get your reaction to what we figure out as we look at this also. So to make sure that we're understanding correctly.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. Thank you.
Thank you very
No,
much.
just send.
Thank you.
So we're past coffee time.
No,
No.
there's still cake for us.
Yeah, great.
Cake time. That's what I meant, is we overran it and now we have to break and eat cake.
We
That's what I meant.
have to have a break now.
That's what I'm saying. Stop agreeing with me. I feel like you're fighting me for agreeing with you. No. So what is the game plan for after the break? Do we go back into the breakouts we were in before? Does that make sense to people?
So Darren, the idea was that you look at a little at this subset, at the UML subset afterwards.
Yeah, okay.
I thought you might be interested after this discussion we had.
Yeah.
Because it's a little related to that.
Yeah,
So,
so
and then it might make sense that we reconvene with Eduard, Pierre, Antoine, in maybe at, I don't know,
4:10.
4:10.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, if we can, I don't know whether you want to look at the agent one, because we're working on that already, maybe, and start to actually instantiate this in some real RDF classes.
Yeah, I think we should talk about the plan, how to proceed.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Hilda, where did we get to with the integration guide stuff? Is that ongoing now that you
I think
just
it
continue?
would make sense to meet with that after the break.
Okay, so 10 past 4 back here.
Yes, and if you will be available